Slowly getting there. All right. Good evening, everyone. This is Rob Orson with the Emerging Relatives Award. I am here with Bert Dunkerley, one of our ERW historians and good friends, and happy to be here tonight. We've been doing a lot of 250 lately, and this one is a little bit out of sync because we're going to be doing Morris Creek tonight, which the anniversary doesn't take place for a few more years, but this is a great lead in to something that I know very little about. And I've always given Bert a lot of grief about this little action because Bert loves this battle. And I'm always like, why is this a national park again? But as I've been doing a lot more reading about it, it does have a really big impact on how things play out in the Southern campaigns in the beginning of the war. So welcome, Bert. How are you doing tonight?
Good, thank you.
Good. So before we jumped on live, I told Bert I had a couple lead-in questions here and there to get things going. And Bert knows a lot about Morris Creek, and he's got some pictures to show us as we continue on. But Bert, if you can, before we get going into the actual fighting and the action, talk about a little bit about the situation in North Carolina in the end of 74 and into 75. The battle takes place February 27th, 1776. But what's going on before then that gets these two sides starting to oppose each other?
Well, I'm going to prove to you that a 2-minute battle can be important, and a battle out in the middle of nowhere can also be important. So we will get to all of that.
Yeah.
The situation in North Carolina in 1776 is that there's a lot of internal division. Of course, the war has already started in New England. Lexington and Concord were the year before, and the siege of Boston and Bunker Hill, all of that's happened. And so there's a lot of uncertainty in the other colonies, especially in the South, Carolinas and Georgia. No one knows if this is going to be an isolated thing or if it's going to spread. Is this going to be a wider war, or will it stay a New England war? So there's that to keep in mind. Looking back on it, we see how clearly it all flows together, but it wasn't clear to them. North Carolina had had a lot of internal division in the years before the Revolution. Some people might have heard of the Regulator movement, which divided the settlers internally. There was a lot of basically corruption and government inefficiency. And some of the people on the frontier, called the back country, the western part of the state, rebelled against the colonial government. And the royal governor raised the militia, and they crushed it at a battle called Alamance, right, in central North Carolina. So there was a lot of lingering bitterness and tension from that. There's the fear of Indian attack on the frontier, primarily from the Cherokee. The royal governor, Josiah Martin, has tried to keep a handle on things in North Carolina, but delegates from North Carolina attend the Continental Congress that meets in Philadelphia, and they're clearly leaning towards revolution. And the governor flees, and he's trying to run the colony from a ship offshore, just like you have happening in Virginia and South Carolina and Georgia. All the royal governors will flee. And the royal governor is trying to organize people loyal to him and maintain royal authority. And I don't want to call them revolutionaries yet because I don't know where this is headed, but the opposition, the Americans, the Whigs, whatever you want to call them, they're organizing too, stockpiling weapons and spying on each other. So it's just a very intense period with a lot of uncertainty, and no one knows where it's going.
And I find it interesting too, at this point, South Carolina is pretty much under Whig or Patriot, whatever you want to call them, control. As you said, the South Carolina governor is gone. Martin seems to be a little bit more involved in North Carolina than the South Carolina governor was. But North Carolina seems to be, you know, the British still have plans there, right? Like they still have, you know, hopes of maintaining control of the colony. Of course, you got Great Bridge takes place just a few months before up in Virginia. That is Dunmore, who's trying to, you know, kind of impact what's going on in North Carolina as well. So it's like you said, it's contentious. And I think unfortunately we read a lot about New England this time, as you mentioned, you know, Bunker Hill and such, but not a whole lot about what's going on in Carolinas, other than what happens in South Carolina at Sullivan's Island. Um, so lay out these two sides for us, if you don't mind. So who's seen as the leader of the Whigs, the Patriots, the anti loyalists, and other than the governor, is there anyone on the loyalist side that you would say is a leader or someone that's out trying to recruit, you know, loyalist militia to the king's side?
So over the fall and winter of 70, you know, late 1775 into the new year 1776, Governor Martin is, again, he's on a ship in the Cape Fear River, and he's trying to maintain control of the colony. He has contacts with people on shore, loyalists, obviously wanting to reassert British authority. And, you know, it's not just a simple matter of, you know, Whig and Tory or loyalist. There's divisions within those divisions.
Right.
There are former regulators, the people who rose up against the colonial government a couple years earlier, and some of them are divided. There's a large Scottish population in the area around modern day Fayetteville, which was then called Cross Creek. Talk more about them in a minute. But both sides are going to want to secure their loyalties. Governor Martin will coordinate with British authorities in the north to bring British troops to Wilmington, not necessarily Wilmington itself, but the Cape Fear area. They didn't know exactly where they might land, but his intention is to bring British troops from the north and use local loyalists to retake control of North Carolina. The details were going to be worked out as they go. That might be a problem, not being able to have everything lined up ahead of time. And there's all kinds of issues with communication and coordination, of course. A British officer named Donald MacDonald, say that a couple times in a row, is sent into the interior to try to raise the royal standard, to try to drum up support for the British. And he goes to the Scottish communities along the Cape Fear, the upper Cape Fear River around modern day Fayetteville, and he starts to organize them. Now, the Scottish are in a really unique position. They've been emigrating and settling in that area for several years. They're very clannish. They don't speak English. They don't blend in with the rest of the population. They have their distinct religion and culture and traditions. They are important because several decades earlier, we had the Scottish uprising, and that was crushed, Culloden. And as part of their, I guess, in the aftermath of that, a lot of Scottish flee to settle in North America, in particular North Carolina. They have to sign an oath of allegiance to the British crown. And a lot of them are disarmed. They're not allowed to own weapons, knives and dirks and swords and things like that. And those are, you know, a lot of traditional Scottish things. So those people are settling in North Carolina. We have this call to support the British crown, and they are bound by oath to do so, even though some of them or their ancestors or relatives may have fought against the British not too long ago.
Right, yeah. That's why I thought it was confusing to me when you talk about this battle. And you would, if you were looking outside in without intimate knowledge of it, you would automatically assume Scottish would be on. a different side.
Yeah, the Scottish element is a really unique aspect of the Battle of Moores Creek and the war that's going to unfold in this part of North Carolina. In the meantime, North Carolina has a provisional government. Basically, when the royal governor flees, a lot of the local leadership just sort of takes over running the colony. And they're raising troops, they're stockpiling weapons, there's committees of safety in every county that are securing things at the local level. They're basically running the colony. They're collecting taxes, they're running courts, they're doing all that kind of stuff that local government should do. And they're very wary of these Scottish people as they start to organize. So both groups will start to collect, and I don't want to get too far into this if you have other questions, but that's where we are in North Carolina.
So who is the Whig governor of North Carolina?
Oh yeah. So we have now I can't remember. We have some of the local militia commanders that we'll talk about are James Moore, no relation to the widow Moore of the battlefield, general in the Continental Army, and militia commanders Alexander Lillington and Richard Caswell.
Yeah. Who stays throughout the war in North Carolina politics, and he's the commander of the militia there at Camden. So recognize that name.
Yes.
So before we get into the British strategy, what do you think the Whigs are trying to accomplish, other than just keeping the British in the Cape Fear region? Are they looking at an offensive operation, or are they looking at defensive operation? What is their strategy in 75 and 76 if you're on the Whig side?
I think they're just trying to maintain control of things. They have control of the colony. I mean, North Carolina doesn't have a single British soldier in it. So they're definitely looking at defense, both external, British coming from the coast, Cherokee on the frontier, and internal enemies like the Scottish and other pockets of loyalists. So I think what they're trying to do through that fall winter period is just organize troops, maintain security, and stockpiling weapons, and just maintaining control. Again, not really knowing what's going to happen. The Congress will be meeting again in Philadelphia.
Did Native Americans, Indians play any part in any of this at this point? I know most of the tribes are going to be in Western North Carolina. Are there any? Do they have any involvement in what's going on between these two factions, the Whigs and the Loyalists?
Not right now, but they're important in that they're a threat on the frontier. Right. And when the war gets going, the British will supply and encourage the Cherokee sort of through the back door. British sending supplies either via Canada or the Mississippi River, and encouraging the Cherokee to attack the frontier, keep the Americans off balance. But right now, they're not really a factor or involved, and there's no Native Americans involved in the Moores Creek campaign.
Yeah, I always ask because you see that a lot in South Carolina, of course, with a lot of actions that took place in the backcountry and such. There's a lot of influence on tribes on both sides of the political coin there.
Yeah.
All right, so you got the Whigs and the Patriots, kind of, I guess, as you said, just kind of trying to create control of the colony, create some kind of organized bureaucracy, government to run the colony, or state, I should say. Sorry, make that mistake all the time and talk about early. But also, I guess we're just keeping an eye on what the British were doing and maybe just kind of play a reactionary game to that. Leading into that, so what you kind of covered a little bit. Let's go more in the weeds here. on the strategy for the British. You talked about how their desire to bring in troops. What troops are those? What British regular troops are involved in some of this, and what's their ultimate goal?
So they're going to be sending troops from the north, Massachusetts, some of the garrison there under General Cornwallis, who we'll hear a lot more about as the revolution goes along.
Sure.
And it's going to be a fleet with several thousand British regulars. That, again, the intention is that they're going to arrive in the Cape Fear and coordinate with the loyalists on land to come ashore and together reassert authority over North Carolina.
All right. So what happens?
Well, in days without cell phones, things don't always go as planned.
Sure.
It's hard to communicate. So in mid-February, General Donald MacDonald, who'd been sent to organize the Scottish Highlanders, he raises about maybe 1,500, maybe a few more in that neighborhood, 1,500 troops. And it includes, mostly Scottish Highlanders, but there's a lot of other loyalists, people born in North Carolina who are loyalists. And the intention is to march down to Wilmington or the Wilmington vicinity on the Cape Fear River and meet that British fleet. They have a lot of challenges. They don't have a lot of weapons. A lot of them have knives and swords, which are great, but not in the age of weapons like firearms. There's, I think, a real resurgence of Scottish pride in a lot of these people who join up because they're wearing their tartans, their kilts, they're brandishing these weapons and symbols of their heritage that they may not have been able to openly display in the past. And as this force starts to move down from Cross Creek towards Wilmington, they don't have a lot of supplies. And it's February. And it's cold and damp. And as they go along, morale is not real high. There starts to be a lot of uncertainty. Where are we going? What are we doing? And that's going to be a problem as this unfolds. The North Carolinians are going to react. Colonel or General James Moore, who has North Carolina Continental soldiers, is going to try to block their route. And this campaign is going to unfold over several weeks. The Loyalist army will be able to march around the first roadblock and avoid battle. And then militia under Lillington are going to move into the area and block one of the river crossings, and the Loyalists are able to outmaneuver them again and cross upstream. And so this goes on for a period of time as the Loyalists are moving towards the coast. The Americans are trying to block them at different points, but they're able to keep going. However, they're low on supplies. There's a lot of uncertainty and I think questioning of what's our ultimate goal, and not having a lot of confidence as this unfolds.
Do the Whig Patriot militia know about the possible British fleet coming in to Cape Fear? Are they aware of what the goal of the Loyalists are, or are they just trying to react to them any which way they can as they move?
They are aware, and so they know that they need to block them from getting to the coast. And there are troops down on the lower Cape Fear. There are defenses being built around the town of Wilmington, and there are fortifications at other points along the river. Some of our listeners might know about Brunswick Town, which is just south of Wilmington on the river. So there's troops patrolling down there as well.
So if you want to, Bert has a couple. There you have a map. If you want to pull up that map, that you can just kind of show people Cross Creek, which is Fayetteville, today, Wilmington, and where things are for those who are watching and will watch in the future. Because not everyone has a good grasp of North Carolina geography.
So this shows on the upper left, you see the Loyalists in red gathering at Cross Creek, which is today Fayetteville, and the first American force in blue, A, that's moving up there. That's General Moore's North Carolina Continentals. Wilmington is sort of bottom center. The Loyalists are able to maneuver around the Americans, and that's what you see, the letter B moving down, and we have Caswell's force coming over from New Bern at C and blocking them. But again, the Loyalists will find a way around that river crossing and keep moving down till finally the last good place to stop them is a bridge in the middle of nowhere called Moores Creek Bridge. And I'll just show you, since we've got my pictures pulled up.
Yeah.
This is the road.
That's awesome.
I mean, it's, and there's places where the road is still intact, like this. It's a dirt road through the pine trees. And imagine moving, your 1,500 men down this road without good supplies. And as they advance, the Loyalists are starting to desert. They're starting to lose heart. Day after day, the numbers are getting smaller. A lot of them don't have muskets. A lot of them have swords and things like that, but they don't have firearms, which is what they really need.
And the colonial capital of North Carolina at the time is New Bern, correct?
Yes. New Bern is where the governor's palace was, and that's where the colonial legislature is meeting.
So to get to Moores Creek, and one of the questions I have already is if the Loyalist forces are able to bypass these two Patriot militia forces, how is it because that there's low on supply? How are these American forces able to get back down in front of them? You know what I mean? Like that's what I'm thinking. If they clear them to the first force and then they clear the second force, how are these American forces able to get down the river there to be able to block them from the Wilmington?
So once the Loyalists managed to evade those first couple roadblocks, the American commanders, again, it's Moore, Lillington, and Caswell. They're coordinating as best they can, and they realize that Moores Creek Bridge is the next good place to stop them. And that's only about 20 miles north of Wilmington. So that's the last good place to do this. Lillington arrives first. He commands the local militia from the Wilmington district area. And Caswell will arrive next with the New Bern area militia. Moore is going to be a little longer. He's got a longer way to come. On the Loyalist side, some of the commanders are starting to get impatient. They see troops are deserting. They know that they're low on supplies. So I think you start to have a sense of desperation setting in among the Loyalists as they get closer.
So is there any communication between the Loyalist forces and British fleet?
No.
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 And I guess too, if you're Caswell or the Patriot forces, you need to get this battle or this action going, because behind you, the British forces land. Now you're in trouble. So there's really, I mean, you didn't mention no communication. I just didn't know if there's anything going on communication wise between this Loyalist force, maybe the governor, maybe this fleet that's coming in off of North Carolina.
No, and that's a real problem, but that's the reality, is that they can't communicate. So Uh, the Loyalists are marching. The British are on their way by sea. The governor is on a ship in the Cape Fear River, and none of them can talk to each other. And they're just hoping to all meet up at the same place at the same time. What's so hard about that?
Right. That's like trying to meet your buddies at the mall in the 80s without cell phones, right?
That's right. Remember that?
You just hope they show up when you're supposed to be there. So okay, we're at Morris Creek Bridge now. So let's talk a little bit about the setup. So as I said, I don't know a lot about the battle, but I do know there are some earthworks or entrenchments, correct, on the Americans on the I say American, but the Whig Patriot side.
Right. So the creek is in a very swampy area, um, and it tends to flood during heavy rains. It's a real barrier. There's no easy way around it other than crossing at the bridge. So when the Americans arrive, um, Lillington's force occupies the south side of the creek. The Loyalists are coming from the north, and he does dig fortifications. When Caswell arrives, his troops camp on the north side. So the Americans are going to be camped on both sides of the creek with the bridge in between. A couple of important things happen at this point. The Loyalists stop about 6 miles above the site, and they hold a conference, and they decide to send an officer down to meet with the Americans. And the important thing to remember here is that despite all that's going on and all this tension and troops being raised and all this, there hadn't been any violence yet in North Carolina. And I think we forget that. There may not have been. But at any rate, messenger comes to the American camp. He meets with Caswell, and he has a summons from General McDonald that says, you need to disband, disperse, and get out of the way, or I will conquer and subdue you.
Big words.
Big words. Caswell politely declines and sends the messenger back. But what that messenger does while he's there is he looks around. He sees no fortifications. He sees no artillery. And he sees that the Americans are camped on the same side of the creek as the Loyalists. They're on the north side.
Right.
The creek's behind them, meaning they're not using the creek as a barrier.
Mm-hmm.
So when he goes back and reports to General McDonald, the Loyalists now think, well, this might be a great opportunity to attack them. McDonald was elderly. He was in his 70s, and he starts to get sick from the cold air and this grueling campaign that they're on. So some younger officers sort of take over and decide that we're going to go forward and attack them. Well, overnight, Caswell abandons his camp, and he brings all his troops to the south side of the creek, so that Caswell and Lillington's forces are now combined on the other side of the creek, behind where the bridge is. Now they are using the creek as a barrier. And again, they have fortifications. There are 2 cannons. And as they go, just to make it fun, they remove the planks from the bridge and they grease the girders. And
I was going to ask you about the bridge, but you covered it. Go ahead.
oh yeah. We don't know what Moore's Creek Bridge looked like, but we know that it was substantial enough to withstand the flooding of the creek when it gets heavy rains. But by doing that, now they've really secured a good defensive position, and there's nowhere really nearby to cross the creek otherwise.
The only place that these Loyalists can cross is there at that bridge crossing. I guess they could probably march so many miles, but that's probably not something that's very conducive if they're trying to get to Wilmington. That takes them away from their destination. So all right. So I'm thinking about this bridge and pulling up the planks. Why I think I know the answer to this, but why didn't they just burn the bridge? Just get rid of the bridge totally,
I don't know. I mean, maybe they just didn't think of that. Maybe they thought they might need to reuse it.
right? I thought maybe they were using it as, inviting them to come that way, right? And because that would definitely, greasing it and everything else you just mentioned would slow it down and kind of funnel that forest into one area right across the creek. Um, so how does this play out? So the loyalists we're almost to our 3 minutes of fighting, right?
You can start your stopwatch when we get there. So I'm going to pull up some more pictures
Sure. Thank you.
to
Yeah.
help us see this. Um, so here we go. All right. So this is the site today, and that's the reconstructed bridge. You're standing on the north side, looking towards the south. So you're on the side that the loyalists are coming from. The Americans were all gathered on the other side in the distance. So overnight, a select group of loyalist troops are going to march that 6 miles down to the crossing. And they're talking, it's a dark and gloomy night. It's cold, it's damp. They lose their way a couple times. When they get down here, they divide into two wings. One wing, called the left wing, moves down towards the bridge, and the right wing moves in from another direction. They discover that the American camp is abandoned.
Gone.
This is where Caswell's troops were, and they're gone. So they don't know what that means. But I think they assumed that the Americans had fled. Well, the right wing moves down to the creek, and they start to lose their way, so they fall back. But the left wing gets all the way down to right here, where you're looking at the crossing. And they find the bridge has been torn up. And the commander is, um, double check his name here, McLeod, Captain Donald McLeod. And he walks up to the edge here and he looks across and he sees someone in the distance on the other side. It's an American sentry. And he calls out to him in Gaelic. He doesn't answer. And so he makes the brilliant decision to fire a musket shot at that person in the distance. And what that does is it wakes everybody up and alerts them that the loyalists are here. Well, the sentry disappears, scampers back to the American camp, and now they all know the loyalists are here. It's still just before dawn. It's still dark out. That musket shot alerted the right wing, which had gotten lost, and they start coming down. One really great account says that the left hand did not know what the right hand was doing as these two wings get separated. But eventually, the loyalists gather here on this side of the creek, and they have a decision to make. It's decision time. It's really important. What should we do? Well, I think in the heat of the moment, with the adrenaline flowing, knowing that you've come this far, this is how I interpret it. Looks like the Americans have fled. The camp is empty and the bridge is torn up. They decide to charge over. So they select 80 men with broadswords. And they start to gingerly work their way across the remaining skeleton of the bridge. They also, these are Scottish troops, right? So they have bagpipes. And they order the bagpipes to play. So if the musket shot didn't wake everybody up, all of that racket would. Mm-hmm. The Americans now know for sure that they're coming. And it's estimated that about 50 picked men with broadswords got over the bridge and onto the other side. Now, what does the other side look like? Well, there's a side shot of the bridge. It's a long causeway. It's very narrow. So the bridge is kind of in the middle of the shot here. You can see it in the distance. And you've got the creek on one side and swamp on the other side. And this road comes through this very narrow place where anyone crossing is sort of trapped. They can't maneuver, funneled in. And this photograph is taken from the American trenchments looking towards the bridge. So as the Loyalists get over to the other side, they start to charge forward. And now it's starting to get light, start to see things a little more clearly. As they charge forward, the Americans are waiting for them. And they're going to have the two cannons loaded and ready. The guns fire, the soldiers fire, and they kill or wound almost everybody who made it over. Captain McLeod is killed he's hit with 27 musket balls.
27.
Within feet of the American earthworks. And here's another shot showing one of the artillery guns. And that's the road in the distance where they're charging up.
So, Bert, I hate to admit this, you have some fans making comments here, so we have to give you kudos for that. People for some reason just love you. But we do have a question about the charge here. Was the use of broadswords simply a symbol of their Scottish heritage, or was it really a lack of the muskets and the lack of proper weapons?
It was both, but it was, I mean, if they had muskets, they still would have carried their broadswords and dirks and knives and everything else. But it's an acute shortage of firearms. Big issue.
So how many men again come across the bridge? Estimate?
It's about 50 crossover, and the rest are lined up on the other side waiting to cross. But as this initial group gets hit, and my estimate is the Americans fire 2 shots, 2 volleys. So fire, reload, fire again. There's your 3 minutes. There's precious few Loyalist accounts at all of any of this. But there's only one account by a Loyalist soldier who made it over the bridge and survived. And he would be wounded and taken prisoner, and he would take 2 years to recover from his wounds. Once the Americans fire their shots, they will climb up over the earthworks and charge, and they'll take a handful of Loyalists prisoner. Most of them are killed or wounded. You know, some are scrambling back over the bridge framework to get back to safety on the other side. Some fall in the creek. It's just total chaos. There's a great account of one American soldier, militiaman, is running up to a Loyalist, and he tackles him, and they have this struggle, and they end up biting each other before the American takes the Loyalist prisoner. There's only 2 American casualties. One man is hit. The account says he was standing up on the earthworks, and there's another man wounded. But it's over very quickly. General Moore, who's not here yet, he arrives literally a few hours after the battle is over. Moore wrote that the Loyalists charged in the most furious manner. It must have really been something to see as they came forward in the early dawn.
So the rest of them stay on the north side of the creek. I guess the bloodshed, the carnage that they witnessed, the fatalities, the fatal attack. I guess the rest of the Loyalist commanders just decided to put, and I guess they do move out of the area, correct?
Yeah. So the ones who were on the other side waiting to cross, they see what's happened, and they realize now that the Americans are there, they're in force, and they're waiting for them. So they retreat back up the road to the main camp where the rest of the army is. Um, and everything just falls apart. Discipline just collapses. Um, a lot of them will just desert, run away. Uh, they break into what few supplies the army still has, so they're breaking into the food that they still have and taking it. Um, McDonald will try to reorganize the remnants of his force, but it's impossible. Uh, their morale is just collapsed. The Americans will reassemble the bridge and pursue. And over the next couple of days, General McDonald is captured, and almost all of the troops are captured. Some in big groups and some in little groups. If any of our listeners are Civil War fans, a large group had made it all the way back up to where the Averysboro battlefield is from the Civil War, up where 95 is today, and a large group were captured up there. But over the next couple of days, these loyalist survivors are hunted down.
So when does word get to British regulars? What happens to the fleet?
Yeah, so that's the rest of this story. As the battle happens and the loyalist army retreats and is scooped up as prisoners, in the meantime, the British fleet is still on its way, and they'll arrive about a week later, and there's no one to meet them. And the British will spend a little bit of time maneuvering up and down the Cape Fear River below Wilmington, and they will skirmish with American troops on shore. They'll send some raiding parties on shore to plunder and scout and probe. But, there's no loyalist army appears, and they can't stay here. So they decide on the next best thing, which is to go down and attack Charleston.
Right.
And we know what's going to happen down there at Fort Moultrie.
So it's the same forces. Someone's asking a question. I had the same question: what happened to the prisoners? Were they paroled? Were any executed? How were they treated? What do we know about some of these loyalists that are taken prisoner?
So we're talking about a lot of prisoners,
Right.
Probably several hundred. And again, the thing that we have to remember is they're looking at this going forward. There's been this attempted uprising in the interior of North Carolina. It's been crushed. Are there more out there? Are they going to reorganize and try it again? Will the British come back? No one knows. It's a lot of uncertainty. The war is still going on in the north, but not much else here in the Carolinas. So what do we do with these people? They really didn't know. A lot of the private soldiers are going to be held in local jails. A lot of the officers are taken to Halifax, North Carolina, which is another place where the government is meeting, the state government, and they're held in the Halifax jail. And they send a lot of the officers then on to Philadelphia and turn them over to the Continental Congress. And they don't know what to do with them.
Right.
Because, this is still the spring of 1776. There's still a lot of people who think we can reconcile with the English. There's still people who want to find a compromise and don't think this war will grow or should grow. Now, eventually what happens to them, a lot of them are exchanged. McDonald and some of the other officers are exchanged for prisoners of the British hold. But the really important thing that I want to emphasize is for the survivors who, whether they're held as prisoners They're released. The loyalists, the Scottish, whether they're Scottish or native North Carolinians, they're going to face persecution over the next couple of years. As the revolutionary government really takes control in the state and the war finally does take off, anyone who has loyalist sympathies will be watched, they'll be disarmed, they'll be persecuted in a lot of different ways. A lot of loyalists will flee because they don't feel safe here. There's it's a cycle of revenge against these people. And a lot of them, this may be getting ahead of things, but a lot of them will be burning for revenge later. And when the British come back to North Carolina during the campaign with Cowpens and Guilford Courthouse, a lot of those loyalists who had to lay low will rise up to support the British again. But there's accounts of people hiding in swamps, being afraid to go home to their families because they might be found. It's a real desperate situation.
So I don't know if you know this or not, but or if you want to part of this, what happened to those who were killed? Are they buried on site? Are they taken somewhere, or do we know?
That's a good question. I'll answer the easy part first. The one North Carolinian militiaman who was killed is John Grady, and according to accounts, he was buried where he fell in the earthworks. And when the site was first commemorated in the 1800s, there was interest in preserving the battlefield even before the Civil War. A monument was put up over his remains on the battlefield at the earthworks. Now, that monument has been moved, and the remains, if they ever really were there, have also been moved. That was done during the bicentennial when the park was really developed. As far as the Loyalists dead, and I don't know, my guess is maybe 30 or so. We don't know. There are no accounts about what happened to them. Did they just throw them in the creek? Be the easy thing to do.
Right.
We don't know, and we probably never will.
And I know we'll get to this in a second, but what's there now? But pitches the whole desire for a lot of us to preserve these places. They're hollow ground. People are still buried today. There's probably a few still there in the grounds there on Morse Creek Bridge today. That's why we preserve some of these places. So I'm going to play the game I hate to play, Bert, but I'm going to say, all right, let's say the Loyalists win this battle. How does that impact things in North Carolina? And I asked that because I hate the what if game, but I asked that because I kind of want to talk about why this is so important in the larger context of what's going on, not just in North Carolina, but from anywhere below Maryland down to South Carolina. Things are quiet after Charleston for a couple of years. And a lot of it has to do with this battle, correct?
Yeah. So I will answer that, but I'll do it my way.
Any way you want to, Bert.
Why is this 3-minute battle in the middle of nowhere important? Well, what happens next? And then we'll get to the what if.
Gotcha.
But what does happen is with the British thwarted and the Loyalists crushed, the British leave, their fleet goes to Charleston. The Americans are firmly in control of North Carolina. And because of this uprising that almost got off the ground, most people, Patriots, Whigs in North Carolina, are firmly now feeling that we cannot go back. Compromise is over. It is time to move on. We are at war, and we need to be an independent country. And in Halifax, the provisional government sends its delegates in Philadelphia instructions to vote for independence. Halifax resolves. And that's one of the dates on the North Carolina state flag. The other one is also a revolutionary event, the Mecklenburg Declaration. Talk more about that later if you want to. but the Halifax resolves are really important. And so North Carolina, sorry, Virginians, North Carolina is the first state to authorize its delegates to vote for independence. Now, in Congress, a Virginian will introduce the measure.
Of course.
Of course. But North Carolina was the first to authorize it.
Right.
And so the movement, in the bigger picture, the movement is now away from compromise and trying to work things out with the British. Now people are really on the path of, this has to be, we have to break away. We're done. And so independence happens in July.
Right.
So that's why it's important. That's what leads to what comes next.
Mm-hmm.
Now, back to your question about what if. Like you, I don't like to do that because you can only go so far.
Sure.
You can't assume everything else stays the same if you change one thing. But, okay, the Loyalists break through and get down to Wilmington, and they meet the British fleet. They probably could have taken control of the lower Cape Fear. Wilmington is the largest town in the colony. It's the most important port in the colony. But what would have happened next? I don't know. Maybe they reassert authority over the lower southeastern part of North Carolina. Would they stay there? It's hard to say.
I think, and you went right into this earlier. I think it plays such a big role in the political outcome of it, right? And it gives the Patriot, the Whigs, and North Carolina the ability to do the Halifax resolves, to do these things with a lot of confidence, knowing that the Loyalists have been suppressed for the most part. The British really aren't going to be here right now, so they have that liberty to do that. And I think that's spot on. I think what you said there is spot on, because it does, small battle, as you said, 3 minutes, but it does have a huge impact on how North Carolina partakes itself in the rest of the war. Because not much happens in North Carolina until, not saying nothing happens, because somebody will say something, but not a lot happens,
yes.
right? And until we get into 1780 and get into Kings Mountain and Cowpens and, of course, Guilford. So wrapping up. So you have intimate knowledge of Moores Creek Bridge. What is there to see today? I know there's a national park there, but how large is the park? Is there anything else around the park to see that's not in the park?
So it is a small park, but it's worth going to see. It's 20 miles north of Wilmington if you're down in that area. They have a visitor center and museum, pretty good exhibits in a video. But there's a trail that goes down to the creek. The earthworks are reconstructed,
Mm-hmm.
and there's some cannons, set up on the battlefield. The bridge is reconstructed, so you can walk through and see all of that, and you're in the exact place where it happened. There's also, I think, a really interesting commemorative history there. The first monument was put up before the Civil War to honor John Grady, the first North Carolinian to die in the War of American Independence. But in the decades afterwards, and especially after the Civil War, when there's interest in preserving Civil War history, there's also interest in preserving revolutionary sites. And so there is a monument to the Loyalists, to the losers, put up by the winners. There's a monument that honors the women of the area who supported the revolution. So there's a couple of interesting monuments there on the battlefield. And they do have a lot of special events. Every February, the weekend closest to the battle is a large living history event with reenactors, guided tours, things like that.
And a lot of us, I know you will be, and I'm going to try to be, will be down there in February of 2026 for the 250th. As those following us know, our ERW Bunch loves to do these anniversaries, and the Boston Tea Party that just took place back in December was amazing, and we have a lot coming up, obviously. It's going to be almost impossible to do them all.
Yeah.
But I think this is one I think it's worthwhile because, as you said, it's a unique site. It's out of the way. I've never been to the park, but it's on my list. I've been by it. But I definitely think it's something that I think everyone watching should go check out because, as you said, those 3 minutes of battle had a huge impact on 3 years of the war. Um, so before we wrap up, Bert, what are you working on? You just had a book come out. Why don't you share that book with everyone?
Yeah, thank you. So I had a book on the French and Indian War in Western Pennsylvania, which is one of my favorite topics, something I've always been interested in. And I wanted to talk about not just the events, but how we understand it and how we know about it. So I include a lot about archaeology at some of the different forts and battlefields and how those sites have been preserved or not. We'll talk about General Braddock, Fort Necessity, a young George Washington, Fort Ligonier, Fort Pitt, Fort Duquesne, all those places.
Yeah, Ligonier's like, I mean, I was with you actually when I saw Ligonier. That's an amazing museum at Fort Ligonier.
Yes.
And Jumonville Glen is still my favorite historic site I've ever been to. Just
Yeah.
amazing going there. You just get the vibe of you know that event because it's so well preserved and you're there and you just kind of transport it back to that time. And you're wondering, what is George Washington doing? I know that's not why we're on this call, but
Yeah. Well, they're just greedy Virginians trying to grab more land.
well, Western Pennsylvania is Virginia, but that's a whole nother debate
Well,
for
you can't have the Steelers, so forget it.
I don't want the Steelers. You can have the Steelers. Well, thanks, Bert. This has been great. I did learn a lot. I've been taking lots of notes. Thank you all for joining us tonight. For those watching, we're here every 2 weeks. If you haven't seen all of our 4 years worth of free content, you go to our Spotify channel or our YouTube channel. All our old revelries are on there. 4 years now, which is amazing that we could keep this going for 4 years. Talking about the 250th, some of us will be in Philadelphia September 7th and 8th there at Carpenter's Hall with Michael Norris, who was with us a few weeks ago on this revelry. We'll be doing some videos from Carpenter's Hall, some behind the scenes commemorating the 250th anniversary of the First Continental Congress, which they have a lot of things planned. If you get a chance to go to Philadelphia over the next year or so, check out Carpenter's Hall. It's a great site. We're looking forward to doing that. We'll be posting videos to our social media pages while we're up there. Other than that, thank you, Bert, for being here. Thank you all for joining us, and look forward to seeing you in